I'm Kailey Lyons alongside Joe Mathieu here in Washington, where we, of course, are following a presidential race that has had many twists and turns, another presenting itself just yesterday with the attempted assassination, again, of Donald Trump. He, of course, came out of that unscathed, and the suspect has been charged with federal gun crimes. But against that backdrop, the presidential campaign continues. Donald Trump himself will make a number of campaign stops this week, and Kamala Harris is doing campaigning of her own today in some sense, as she is participating in a meeting with the Teamsters Union, of course, helmed by Sean O'Brien, who spoke at the RNC in Milwaukee, and to this point has withheld an endorsement from the union for either candidate. Of course, after speaking at the RNC, he has since dubbed Donald Trump and his idea around laying off workers as economic terrorism, but that doesn't mean that he's speaking in favor of Harris yet to this point.
Yeah, that followed the interview with Elon Musk, remember, on Twitter Spaces, in which he credited Elon with being the greatest cutter of all time, and they kind of laughed at the idea of firing workers who were interested in organizing. So the conversation changed a lot since Milwaukee, but they still haven't met. And there was an important line that the head of the Teamsters Union brought on CBS. He said he has not endorsed Kamala Harris yet because, quote, you don't hire someone unless you give them an interview. And the interview's happening today, Kailey, and we're joined by somebody who knows a little bit about this. Seth Harris, a frequent voice on this program when it comes to matters involving labor. He's senior fellow at the Burns Center for Social Change at Northeastern University, former top labor advisor to Joe Biden, in fact, former deputy secretary of labor. Seth, it's great to see you. Welcome back to Bloomberg. So we finally have the interview today, the job interview. Kamala Harris is sitting down with the head of the Teamsters Union. Will it end in an endorsement?
I think it will. She's actually going to meet with President O'Brien and some members of the executive board, but also there will be rank and file Teamsters involved in the meeting. And I think it'll end up an endorsement because the discussion will be about policy. And on labor policy, there is simply no question that Vice President Harris has built a record that is far better for the Teamsters Union than President Trump's record. President Trump pretty aggressively anti-union when he was president. Vice President Harris cast the deciding vote that assured that tens of thousands of Teamsters retirees would have their pensions secured, strong supporter of collective bargaining and worker organizing. The Biden administration, Biden-Harris administration appointments to the NLRB and to the Labor Department have made a tremendous difference in Teamster organizing and Teamster collective bargaining. And one of the biggest issues for the Teamsters is what should be done when employers misclassify workers as independent contractors and therefore deprive them of the minimum wage and collective bargaining rights and organizing rights. Vice President Harris has been very, very strong on that issue dating back to her time as an attorney general. President Trump's administration made it a lot easier for employers to misclassify workers. So if that's where the conversation lies, I expect the Teamsters will endorse Vice President Harris.
But if, Seth, all of that is true, it raises the question of why such an endorsement hasn't happened already if she is so obviously pro-labor as you describe her. The fact that it has yet to happen and may happen after this meeting, does that suggest there's going to be an ask from the union? Do you expect they're going to want something specific from a Harris administration?
I don't think it'll be a quid pro quo kind of meeting. I take President O'Brien at his word that what matters to him is allowing his members and the leaders of the union alongside him to hear the views of the candidates for president up close and personal, to be able to ask them pointed questions about what their presidency would mean for the Teamsters Union. I think that's a reasonable thing to expect. The Teamsters have said all along that they're going to wait until after the conventions to make their endorsement. I think this will be the last step.
Okay, that said, 1.3 million members. That's a serious ground game if you activate them. Regardless of the campaign, regardless of the endorsement, Seth, how do the Teamsters use 1.3 million members to get someone elected?
Well, they give a lot of money. They give a lot of elbow grease. They give a lot of shoe leather. They will campaign among their members, because I think that some of their members are still almost certainly undecided in this race. They will mobilize their members who are for Vice President Harris to get out to vote. But they'll also communicate with Teamster family members, with Teamster community members. And I think that they will get out and support the campaign very aggressively with volunteer hours and with telephone calls and with door-to-door canvassing. Teamsters can be a very, very effective union, and they have significant prominence in a lot of the critical swing states that are going to decide this election. Remember, there's a UPS driver almost everywhere in America, and those folks are Teamsters.
Well, and we remember well last year's negotiations between the Teamsters and UPS as well. That was one of the prominent periods of labor strife, if you will, that we were paying attention to, followed, of course, by the actors and writers in Hollywood, then the UAW strikes with the auto workers. And now we're dealing with a different situation, Seth. It's Boeing, with 33,000 workers having walked off the job in Seattle last week, something that could hamper production. Boeing now saying it's going to freeze hiring to try to preserve cash during this period, because this is a company that's actually on junk watch. It could lose its investment grade credit rating potentially as a result of this, Seth. If you're the union trying to extract or exercise leverage against a company that arguably is in very precarious position, how much room do you really have when you don't want to actually risk these jobs just disappearing altogether?
Well, let's start by acknowledging that Boeing has been the company that has shot itself in the foot more than maybe any other in America. They have safety problems. They have law problems. They have debt problems. I mean, this is a company that has had really serious challenges over the course of the last, let's go back a decade. They could enter into a partnership with their union, and the union could help them to be much, much more successful at what they're doing. But they came to the table with an offer that, frankly, was an insult to the members of the Machinists Union. They represented their pay increase as being 25%, but then they took back an annual bonus of 4%. So the increase, the pay increase would have only been about 9% a year. These members have not had a pay increase over almost a decade, except for cost of living adjustments. I think that you have a lot of very, very, very angry machinists out in Washington state who have been cut out of the collective bargaining process for almost 16 years for a whole bunch of reasons. A bunch of their work was shifted out of Washington to a non-union plant in South Carolina. They want to see significant progress in this collective bargaining agreement, and I think they're going to continue to hold Boeing's feet to the fire. It's going to be up to management to figure out how to produce the resources that are needed.
Should Kamala Harris walk the picket line with these members the way Joe Biden did the UAW?
I don't know if they've asked her to do that yet, but my guess is that if they invited her, that she would come. She's walked picket lines before, and she is very, very strongly supportive of workers getting a fair share of the profits that they produce. I think she would like to see workers' wages go up. The union here has demanded 40% without the take back of the bonuses. So I think it's going to be a very, very interesting strike going forward. My hope is that it will be resolved quickly by the parties coming to the table and their ability to reach a deal. But I have to be honest, I'm a little bit skeptical. I think, you have new leadership at Boeing that has never seen anything like this before, and you have some very, very angry machinists. Hopefully they'll get some of that anger out on the picket line and they'll be able to get to a deal.
All right. Well, we'll all be watching to see how this develops in the coming days and potentially weeks ahead, Seth. Meantime, this week, we're all really focused on one big event that comes on Wednesday. It's the rate decision from the Federal Reserve. Yes, it's expected to be a cut. The question is of what size? And this gets to the labor market and the position it is in very specifically. As you look at the concerns raised by a trio of senators in a letter to the Fed today, Elizabeth Warren, Sheldon Whitehouse, and John Hickenlooper, authoring a letter urging the Fed to cut by 75 basis points on Wednesday because they think if the Fed is too cautious in cutting rates, it would, quote, needlessly risk our economy heading towards a recession. Is that a view you share, Seth?
I would like to see the Fed cut interest rates by at least 50 basis points. I think there is a justification for doing 75 basis points. But the truth of the matter is the Fed has been extraordinarily cautious. They are very concerned about inflation. I think too concerned about it and not concerned enough about jobs and the state of the labor market. We have seen some meaningful slippage in the labor market over the course of the last year. We have seen the number of job openings decline. We've seen the number of workers quitting their jobs decline. We have not seen a big increase in layoffs because employers continue to hug their workers. They don't want to have to go out into the labor market and find new workers. But I think we need to juice growth in the economy and juice the labor market. So I think the senator's position is certainly justifiable. I think it's unlikely that the Fed is going to go quite that far. I think 50 basis points is more likely, and I fear it could be 25 basis points, which would send a terrible signal both to workers and to Wall Street.
Well, that's interesting. If there's room for 75 or justification for 75, Seth, does that mean the Fed was that late or things have deteriorated that much since July?
I think they are late. I think they are late to the game here. We have seen slow drip deterioration in the labor market for many months now. It didn't all happen over the summer. And there have been signals sent to the Fed that the labor market was beginning to face trouble. Now, it's not a crisis. It's not the end of the world. We're not headed towards a recession. But certainly the revisions that we have seen from the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the number of jobs that have been created tell us that the labor market has been growing much, much more slowly than we believe. The Fed should have sensed that. They should have understood that from their beige book, and they should have acted much, much sooner. Now I'm concerned that they're going to do too little, and it might be too late.
Seth, finally, before we let you go, as we consider the dynamics in the labor market and the pace of job creation, I wonder if some of the policy proposals we've heard from former President Trump, specifically the notion of not taxing overtime hours worked, if you're worried about the disruptive effect that could have in the labor market, if you can make more or not be taxed on your overtime hours, does that actually encourage existing employees to work longer rather than another employee potentially filling those hours?
Well, that's the theory of overtime, is that if you make overtime more expensive, employers will hire additional workers instead of making their current workers work harder. It was all about trying to bring down the number of hours that current incumbent employees are working. Removing the income tax on overtime won't have any effect on employer behavior because the costs will be the same for employers. It's just that employees will do a little bit better. But that's not the best solution for our economy, that workers should have to work really, really, really hard and then get a small marginal increase in their pay because we've gotten rid of income taxes on overtime. The better strategy is higher wages for workers across the board, a higher minimum wage, higher prevailing wages, higher wages through union organizing and workers collectively bargaining for better wages in that way. Very tight labor markets that make labor a seller's commodity, not a buyer's commodity. That is the way that we help the largest number of workers more. We want workers to balance their work life and their home life. More overtime is not the solution to that.
All right, Seth Harris, Senior Fellow at the Burns Center for Social Change at Northeastern University, former top labor policy advisor to President Biden. Thank you so much. Speaking of